All right, let's move into the Ukrainian issue and a couple of other topics as well. Joining me from Adelaide, columnist for the Australian newspaper, Dr. Jennifer Oriel, and from Coffs Harbour, former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, John Anderson. I'll start with you, Jennifer, if I can. Fast-moving situation. Obviously, we can see Putin's agenda very clearly laid out and the reaction from the West, talking sanctions only at this stage. Where's this headed, do you think?
I think it's pretty clear now that Russia intends to take all of Ukraine. The notion that this is just about Russia preventing genocide in the Russian rebel-backed areas of Ukraine is a nonsense. This is an invasion. The intent is to take Ukraine because Putin believes that the area, the geography, is a part of Greater Russia, and he wants to recreate Greater Russia. He sees himself as a Tsar, as Tony Abbott pointed out in his excellent column in The Australian today. And Kiev is a spiritual centre for Russian Orthodoxy. So I don't think there's any doubt that this is the beginning of a full-blown invasion and could set off a very dangerous precedent, a domino effect across the region. And in the 1947, nearly 75 years ago, the Truman Doctrine was adopted in the US as the major first point of foreign policy to have a bulwark against Soviet communist aggression. And we're going to need something similar, I think, a revival of some kind of joint agreement between allied states that we have to push back against imperialism of any kind.
I don't know, John, I look at the leaders of the world now dealing with this issue. Obviously, we've got concerns too with China. I don't feel we've had this sort of challenge to the West since we were back in the late 30s. But I also don't think we've got the leaders that we had in the late 30s. Prove me wrong.
I think the situation is obviously very serious. It's been allowed to evolve because of a perception of weakness and lack of conviction in the West. And there's an eerie parallel with how Germany and Japan felt about particularly Britain and America in the 1930s. So what we have is now, there's no other word for it, an invasion. How deep and extensive that invasion becomes will now depend on whether or not we quickly find some willpower and learn the lessons of the Second World War, which were that a series of ugly border skirmishes turned into a global meltdown that cost 60 million lives. Had people acted earlier, had people listened to Churchill, had they stepped up in a more convincing way, that could have been prevented. Now, the grave danger here that Jennifer has alluded to is I think that the great winner out of this, if we're not careful, will be China, because if they perceive that the LAC really does lack conviction, we face a real danger in this country, as well as in combination with the rest of the region and indeed the world, that Taiwan becomes the next Ukraine. There's a lot at stake. We need to remember, I think, that strength gives us our best chance of avoiding war. We need to remember that conviction is always more powerful when we're up against authoritarian regimes that are very convicted of the rightness of their cause than self-doubt and hand-wringing of the sort that the West has been engaging in for too long.